from the beginning of the age. The song's been sung and never fades. You are the light, you will sustain. Your name's the only one we praise. Your name's the only one we praise. Yeshua, our God, you rule and reign, and we sing hallelujah, where you dwell, oh God. We will remain singing hallelujah, sing hallelujah. Your holy place I will not leave. Your power moves me to my knees. Our hearts are burning in your flame, a love that cannot be contained. Your name's the only one we Yeshua, our God, you rule and reign, and we sing hallelujah, where you dwell, oh God. We will remain singing hallelujah, sing hallelujah. Yeshua, our God, you rule and reign, and we sing hallelujah, where you dwell, oh God. We will remain singing hallelujah, sing hallelujah.
She just said everybody just needs to read the email. All right, so we'll just go with that. All right, Ben Miller, since you're nodding your head in agreement, come on up here. You were just like, yes, read the email. That's right, yes. Everybody stand. Let's have the blessing after the meal.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all of your many blessings. We thank you for the food that you've provided for us in this time where we can come in fellowship with one another. We ask that as we go throughout the rest of our evening, that everything we learn, that we would just hide it in our hearts. We ask that we would go throughout the rest of our day with wisdom, and we thank you for these things in the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. All righty. So is Nayla still over there? All right, so you're going to take her group over. So if you're in Miss Nayla's class, follow him, I guess. No, follow Miss Heather over, if you will. And she'll take you over to Miss Nayla. That's from ages 5 to 9. All right. And then is Abby over here? Abby? Okay. Beth, could you do me a favor, please? Could you do me a favor? Could you lead the quiver over, please? Yeah, I think Abby might be with Melody. All right, quiver, you're dismissed. Lead them to somewhere nice, I guess. I'm good. How's everyone doing this evening? You're doing good? All right. Well, you'll have to pardon me. These weather systems mess me up. So I've had a migraine all day. So I've been taking a leave, bathing in peppermint oil, drinking coffee, try to move it on out of here. But anyway. And so consequently, we're going to do what we did last week because I couldn't really get anything prepared today. So I thought we would go back to last week and some of the questions that we didn't get around to. If we didn't get around to your question, if you're here, maybe if you want to ask, we'll get that ready in just a little bit. But I had several things here from the last tour portion that were online that we did not address. And so I thought I'd take a little time to do that real quick. Is that all right? Thank you. All right. All right. Somebody wanted to know about what was the significance of the dove bringing back the olive branch after the flood after the floodwaters had begun to abate. So I thought we probably should go back and read a little bit there. And let's see here. In Genesis chapter 8, in verse 6, and it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent forth a raven. By the way, just in case you're interested, the word for raven is oriv. And Jonathan, I'm going to go to the tablet, please, sir. It's ayin resh bet, oriv. But it comes from the root word, and it's spelled identically to this. The root word is arav, and by now many of you should know what that root word means: to mix or to mingle. So the idea of the raven being connected to the idea of mixing and mingling. The raven is clean or unclean bird? It's an unclean bird. Why is it an unclean bird? It feasts on dead stuff, right? All right, so it feasts on death. So the oriv comes from the idea of something that is mixed and mixed and mingled leads to what? To death. So he sent forth a raven which went forth to and fro. Now, where have you heard that phrase before? Going to and fro. The adversary, he goes to and fro. He is as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. In the book of Job, he's going to and fro in the earth. So little hints here, I think, about some of the things that are going on, or what things connect to. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And he sent forth a raven which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off of the earth. And so this raven apparently goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until the waters are actually dried up off the earth. Now, it doesn't return. I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit, but we find out that the raven doesn't return. Now, here is my opinion. The reason the raven doesn't return is because he doesn't need to. He's been feasting on what? All the dead carcasses that are floating around in the water. Right? So he doesn't have to. So that's my opinion. It doesn't say that in the text, but I think that's a pretty plausible idea there. And he also sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her in unto him into the ark. So since we showed you the word for raven, I'm going to go back to the tablet, and I want to show you the word for dove. And this is something we've talked about from time to time, but it's Yud Vav Nun He, and it's pronounced Yonah. Now, how do we say that? Jonah. So Yonah is a dove. And so the Yonah is sent forth. It can't find anywhere to rest the sole of its foot. Of course, it's not going to be feasting on dead carcasses because it is a clean bird, right? And he stayed yet another 7 days, and again, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came into him in the evening, and I think that's interesting. And lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. Now, the fact that it comes in the evening, there's those same three Hebrew letters, Ayin, Resh, Bet. The root word means to mix or to mingle, arah, but here it's pronounced erev, because that's the evening. So why is the idea of the evening tied to the idea of mixing and mingling? Because evening is when light is mixing with darkness. Day is mingling with night. So it's in the evening when the dove comes in, and it's got an olive branch plucked off from a tree. And let me look at something just to verify here, because I'm just kind of going off the cuff, to be honest with you. But in Genesis 8, let me show you the root word from which we get plucked off. Oh, come on. The root word is pronounced taraf. Now, here's why that's interesting to me. Because this is the same word, the same root word that's used in Hosea chapter 6, where it says, "Come and let us return unto the Lord, for he has torn," and that word in Hebrew is taraf. That's the root word. He has torn, but he will bind us up. He is broken, but he will heal us. When does he do this? After 2 days, he will revive us, and on the third day, he will raise us up that we may live in his sight. So there's some linguistic connections here to the idea of what's going on with the dove, the olive branch, and Hosea chapter 6. And so what would be the connection there in Hosea 6? Those who have gone their own way, done their own thing, but now they're returning unto the Lord. He's torn, he's plucked even, could be implied there, but he's going to bind us up. So what would be the connection to that idea and the Yonah, which is an emblem of what? Or who? The Spirit of God, right? Going out, and he comes back and he has an olive branch that's been plucked, freshly plucked from what? An olive tree. So think of olive trees, things being broken, things being torn, things being plucked, things being bound back together. Are you tracking with me here? So what's the significance of the olive, of the Yonah, the dove, coming back into the ark with the olive leaf or olive branch in its mouth? Here's what I think. It's speaking prophetically of what's going on right now in this day and time. Because you and I are living out what is written in Hosea 6. Come and let us shuv, let us return unto the Lord. Why? He is broken, but he's going to bind us up. He's torn, he's plucked, and he's going to bind us up. He's going to raise us up after 2 days he's going to revive us after 2 days and raise us up on the third day that we may live in his sight. All right? So we are living out that prophecy. Now, in prophetic terms, is it the morning or is it the evening? It's evening. How do we know that? Because everything's about mixing and mingling and coexistence and all those kinds of things. So prophetically speaking, it's evening. So as the sun is getting ready to set and soon it will be dark when no man can work, what is the Father doing? He is gathering in those who are this wild olive branch, and he's putting them in and bringing them in and binding them up and making them part of his family. Does that make sense to you? Also keep in mind that the waters are emblematic of the nations. So the Spirit of God is going out where? To all the nations, going out and searching for those that are his and bringing them and luring them back and drawing them close into himself. So, there's probably some other things associated with what's going on there, but I see it as, at least in part, it's speaking to the idea of what Romans 11 is all about. How Paul talks about how there was this cultivated olive tree. It was supposed to produce olives. Some of the branches, because they didn't believe, they were broken off, and because they were broken off, then those of us who were part of this wild olive tree that was growing out here doing its own thing. Nevertheless, he tore or plucked that wild olive branch and then brought it and then grafted into, bound it to this already cultivated olive tree. And of course, that gets into third day prophecies and things bearing fruit and what happens when the olive tree bursts forth into fruitfulness. According to Paul in Romans 11, I think it's verse 25, all Israel shall be saved. All right, so then that's just kind of a summary of that. Okay, someone had asked, is it true that November 3rd, which is Tuesday, which is election day, is also the 17th day of Cheshvan, and what would be the significance of that? Of course, the 17th day of Cheshvan would be, some believe that that is the day that the flood began, that the waters of the great deep were broken up and the flood waters began to rain down upon the earth. It was the 17th day of the second month. So there is the debate about whether the second month should be considered Cheshvan or it should be considered Iyar, which follows Aviv. But there are a lot of people who believe that before Exodus 12, the first month was Tishrei, the second month would have been Cheshvan. So if that is so, that means that on the 17th day of Cheshvan is when the flood began to begin to break forth on the earth. So Tuesday night, as polls are closing, we will go into the 17th day of Cheshvan, which, if what I just explained to you is accurate, it is going to coincide with the day that the flood began, 5,600 years ago, something like that. Interesting. Now, what does it mean? I don't know. I could speculate a little bit, and that's all it would be. But here's what I consider the floodwaters to be. Judgment for some, vindication for others. It is the same event is two different things, or can be two different things. Judgment for some, vindication for others. So I'm about to get in trouble, but here we go. Beit, Yud, Dalet, Nun. See if anybody can guess what it is. Now, if I break this down, I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on now, okay? I'm going to break this down into two words. I don't know. It depends on how you look at it. Judgment for others is vindication for somebody else. We'll see, But it is kind of interesting, That's tinfoil hat material. Brad would call this Area 51, But somebody had asked me about this, and so there's just, I don't know. It is interesting that this very significant and important election is going to coincide with what is most likely a very important biblical date. Make of that what you will. All right? All right, somebody was asking me, what are your thoughts on the greater Exodus? Well, I'm all for it. Especially, and it might be even more so on November 4th, I don't know. But no, I mean, the greater Exodus, there really isn't anything, there's no doubt about that there is an event because the prophets all talk about it. Isaiah 11, Ezekiel chapters 36, 37. There's a host of other prophecies that talk about how one day that the Father is going to regather all of his people from all the different sections and parts of the earth. And I'm going to go ahead and put this out there, corner of the earth, because I'm going to come to something that somebody asked in just a moment. But anyways, he's going to gather all the people in from the nations, and he's going to bring them into the land that he swore to Abraham and to his seed. So there isn't any doubt about that. However, how is it going to happen? I don't know. When is it going to happen? I don't know. Is he going to divide the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean like he did the Red Sea so we can all walk through? I don't know. So there's a lot of these questions that people ask. I don't know that anybody knows. In fact, I'm kind of the opinion, I don't even think we're supposed to. I don't think we're supposed to try to figure out how, where, when, all of those things. What I think we're supposed to be focused on and what he's given me to do today and what he's going to give me to do tomorrow. And, overall, long term, keeping my eyes on the author and the finisher of our faith as he leads us from day to day, from week to week, to month. And when all of these things begin to happen, I think we'll know. I think we'll understand. One of the things about the former Exodus that I believe we need to keep in mind is that when all these plagues were being poured out and they were thinking they were going to leave and, it didn't happen when they thought it was going to happen. But when it came down to the death of the firstborn and they were told to eat the Passover, make your bread in haste, eat it with your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand, your loins girded, your belt around your waist, they kind of knew this is it. And so there was no ambiguity about that. And so I feel like when these things begin to happen, if they happen in our lifetime, when the time comes, we're going to know. Noah knew 7 days before the flood came that he had 7 days to go into the ark. And whether or not it was Methuselah's death that precipitated that, the point is, right at the end, he knew. All those years spent building the ark before, he knew what was coming. He didn't know when. There was nothing in the Bible that tells us that he knew exactly when it was going to happen. He just did the things that he knew he was supposed to do until God said otherwise. And so I believe it's the same with this. We do what we know we're supposed to do. We build relationships with one another here. We raise our families the way we're supposed to. We be a light in the darkness. We're be the salt that we're supposed to be. And then as these things begin to congeal and all the right parts are in place, then we'll begin to recognize that these things are happening. Another question was in the Torah portion from last week, it talked about how in the days of Peleg, the earth were divided. What does that mean? My understanding is that there are basically two camps, and that one is that this is when I forgot the term, but there's a term to describe the earth where all the different continents were just one big landmass. Pangea, thank you. And so there's a lot of people believe, and I tend to believe this, that when it was all one landmass, perhaps it was subsequent to the flood, maybe it was because of the flood, but anyway, that this one big landmass began to divide and part and it became all these different continents. That might be one explanation. But there are those who believe that it's talking about that in Genesis 11, how that in the days when they were building the tower, that the Father confused all the languages and the people divided up into these different nations and countries. So I wasn't there when it happened to tell you exactly what it means, but those are two different ideas about what it does mean. How and why did the Nephilim escape the flood? So how did the Nephilim escape the flood? Why did the Nephilim escape the flood? Here's my question in response to that. What if they didn't? And I'm of the opinion they didn't. I don't think, there's a commentary in Jewish literature about how Og grabbed hold of the back of the ark and rode out the flood. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. Everything was destroyed. The Creator said, I'm going to destroy everything except those that went into the ark. And I believe that that is exactly what happened. So I don't believe that the Nephilim survived the flood. I don't believe that there's any reason to get into why they would have survived the flood. But here is, I think, at the heart of the question is because there are Nephilim after the flood. So how did that come about? Which gets into things that I'm not going to talk about tonight. Because if I start down this road, I guarantee you we'll spend all night long talking about sons of God and Nephilim. But I do not believe the Nephilim survived the flood. All right? So, with that, are there any questions that any of you have, or any of these things, the questions that came up, anybody like to make any further comments on them? All right. Who's going to help me? Jay, you've been here 3-4 times now, haven't you? Third time. Okay, there you go. Come grab the mic. You are in the family now. So if you will, just kind of take the mic around. Back there to the back. Robin had a question.
Which one's Robin?
Okay, well, that's fine. You can add too.
All right, thank you. So the reason I'm saying this about the water thing is because Christ asked his people to go look for, the disciples to go look for the guy who was carrying the water jug, for them to go up, prepare for the upper room, right?
Okay.
So men generally don't carry around a water jug. That's usually something women do. Forget not that we are in the astrological house of the great water bearer.
Okay, now which question is this connected to? I'm sorry.
So it's not really, the statement that you were saying about the water and the flood and the Biden and the last judgment.
Oh, okay. You mean those things where I was wearing my tinfoil hat?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so say what you said again. So now that I know what you're connecting it to, so I can better follow what you're saying.
So the last judgment, the Biden and the great flood that comes in, that we need to also remember that we're in the astrological house of the great water bearer.
Okay, you mean astronomical?
Yes, sir. So
okay, let's rephrase that.
So Christ told his disciples to go and seek the guy out who was carrying the water jug, but men don't normally carry water jugs in that time.
True.
Why it would have stuck out.
Exactly.
So
they were preparing for the meeting in whether it's really an upper room or not, but preparing for the Last Supper.
Right.
So, alas, the final judgment, and then, in the third day risen on the third 6,000th year.
All right. We shall see. I didn't make, by the way, when I was writing that, I'm not making any predictions. I'm just saying this is interesting. Take and do with it what you will. We shall see. All right. Okay, Diana over here.
Okay. I have a question about baptism. Why we haven't baptized? Or you have announced a baptism coming up or something like that?
Well, no. We were talking about perhaps doing a mikveh at Sukkot. But yes, the only day we could do it, it was pouring down rain, and I just wasn't going to stand out there in the rain. So are you asking to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's all you had to do. We can arrange it.
Well, I think I'm not just the only one who wants to get baptized.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you're not.
And do a big party.
So we'll have a baptismal party. Is that what you're saying?
L'chaim.
Yeah, well, we can do a mikveh. Now, if we're going to do it, we probably want to do it sooner rather than later. Because here's what's not going to happen. We're not going to wait till December and have like 30 people wanting to mikveh and Bill be out there the whole time. That ain't going to happen. Okay? I did that once in Israel, in the Jordan. It was in December. And all these people were on the trip with us, and they wanted to do the mikveh in the Jordan River. So I did. And my legs were numb when I came out of that. That is not exaggerating. In fact, there's this one lady, she might be watching, or her daughter might be watching. She was from New Mexico. Her name's Johnny. And how old was Johnny? She's in her 80s probably. Yeah, she's 80 or very close to it. But anyway, so we get out there to the Jordan River, and it is cold. I mean, frigid. And my legs are already numb. And so she stepped out and she said, "Oh, this is too cold. I can't do it." I said, "No, you're getting yourself out here." I don't care if you're 80 years old, you're going to get out here. Because I'm out here. We did this because you wanted to do it. So anyhow, yeah, we can do that. And she did do it. And she said that she was very glad that she did it. Everybody was freezing when they came up. They were, like that, but they were all glad they did it. So, no, we can do that. So if you would like to do that, let's talk about that, privately. And if there's somebody, some others, we'll let them know when we can do it, where, and all those kinds of things. Okay? All right. Was that all you wanted to say? Okay. Anyone else want to add anything, ask anything?
I do, but
sure.
It's Talmud based.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll see.
All right. You're probably, in all your studies, hopefully familiar with the Yoma 39 stuff.
Well, I can't quote it, but
40 years before the destruction of the temple, all those things that happened at the temple. That's the part in history in the Talmud.
In the part where the scarlet thread ceased to occur.
Let's see here. The red ribbon that they tied to the door of the temple stopped turning white on Yom Kippur, which it always did before. That was the year that, oh gosh, let me see if I can remember it all. The doors of the temple opened of themselves. Even Josephus said that, and people freaked out. Why are these gigantic doors that took 20 men to close suddenly opening themselves? Gosh, what else?
Well, there was a sign in the heavens too. There was the sign of the probably a comet or meteor or something like that. Something like that was going on.
And there's several things that happened in what in the Talmud says is 40 years before the destruction of the temple. Do the arithmetic. That's 30 A.D. Now, of course, many commentators, especially of the Jewish bent that believe in Yeshua, say that was the year that Yeshua died. It was 30 A.D. and based on, and I'm sure you already know all that the 4 BC when King Herod died. Well, he was around at the time that Jesus was born because he sent the soldiers to Bethlehem, and he died in 4 BC. Do the arithmetic again. If he was 30 years old when he started his ministry, that means he started somewhere around 27 AD. He had about a 3.5 year ministry. That means he died in 30 AD. And that's when all this weird stuff, according to people in the Talmud, the Jewish rabbis that wrote the Talmud, that, oh, by the way, we're not big fans of Yeshua, wrote. But interestingly, all these things started happening at the temple that year. And have you read it?
Yeah.
Do you know of which I'm speaking?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Then let's get to the point. Abrahamic covenant about 4,000 years ago. No, let me see if I get that right.
Yeah, that's close. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be about 4,000 years ago, right?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. Getting to the point, sorry. It's been about 2,000 years, and then approximately 6,000 by some estimates since Adam. That's all very rough. Some are saying, 2030 would be the year then of the return of Jesus when you do the math. And there's a whole lot going into that in the Talmud. Have you read any of these eschatological theory about 2030 and the timing?
Yeah, I have.
In fact, you read one of those scriptures that is quoted in the defense of this idea that he returns in 2030, and that after 2 days he will revive us. To the Lord a day is of 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as of a day. After 2 days he revives us, and the third day he raises us up. Well, let's see, 2 days, the millennium starts, third day we get to go to heaven. Anyways, so that's part of the theory. Comments?
Well, okay. So there are things, just to kind of condense what you were saying. Yes, there were recorded signs and different things that happened before the destruction of the temple, a generation before
It started
happened.
exactly 40 years before the destruction.
Right, but would
in which-
coincide with the ministry of Yeshua and the death. In fact, if the tractate you're referring to in the Talmud is talking about the same event, here's what I think happened. The reason that the miracle of the scarlet cord ceased to happen is because what happened when he died? What happened when he gave up the ghost?
Veil of the Holy of Holies
Right.
was torn, and he put the blood on the mercy seat.
Well, the veil of the temple was torn, and most likely is because due to the earthquake, that lintel, that frame, whatever that
Broke.
thick, heavy curtain was hanging on, broke in two, and it tore it down. So there was a lot of things going on during that time. But to the point of his return being coinciding with 2030, I know we're in those days. I know we're in that season. As far as putting dates on it, one of the reasons that I'm here tonight is because a guy wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1988.
Ah, yes.
Okay? I read that book. It freaked me out, quite frankly, but it had a positive effect on my life. Obviously, he didn't return when that Mr. Wisenut thought he was going to. And so that's a lesson for me, not to get too fixated on dates, but to recognize the signs, the seasons, the things that are going on, and to understand that there are things that are telling me that we are at the threshold of these things beginning to happen. When? I don't know. That's why I have to keep my eyes fixed ahead, There is another Talmudic legend, or if that's the right word, about a generation before the Exodus from Egypt. There was about 30,000 Ephraimites who knew that the Exodus was going to occur, and they had calculated when it was supposed to happen, and they ended up leaving about 40 years before Moses got back to lead them out, and they all, according to this commentary, they all perished in the wilderness. Why? Because it wasn't the right time.
Right.
So it's very important that we understand the times, we discern the times. The children of Issachar, they had understanding of the times, and they told Israel what to do, and every man was, listened to them. So it's important that we understand the times and the seasons, and that we wisely, what's the word I'm looking for here? Guide God's people through these times. I'm not going to get fixed on a date, though, personally.
Mm-hmm.
So if that was your question, or you asked for comments, that's my comment. It is interesting, absolutely interesting. And I do believe that God does things on time, not a day before, not a day after, but they left Egypt on that same day, according to the prophecy that he'd given Abraham.
Mm.
However, there were some people who miscalculated, if the legend is true, So anyway, my thoughts. Was there something else you wanted to add?
No.
Okay.
All
All right. Anyone else want to add something? Ask something right behind you.
Easy, Stevie. Yes, I'm curious about, want to shift to thinking about olive trees. And
all right.
what a natural-born olive tree and its fruit is like versus the wild olive tree on its own, versus when the two are grafted together.
Are you asking, or are you about to tell me?
No, I'm asking for.
I will tell you that this is not my field of expertise. I will relate to you what I learned several years ago visiting an olive yard in Israel,
Okay.
as it relates to cultivated and wild and grafting and all those kinds of things. There's probably people out there who know a lot more about it than I do. But my basic understanding of, cultivated as opposed to wild, the reason you would graft something that would be considered wild into something that was cultivated is because there is, I'm going to use my terminology, there's some oompa in that that wild tree, so to speak, and it has something in it that provokes that tree that's been cultivated to really explode into fruitfulness. Now, again, I'm boiling it down and paraphrasing it as it went in my head and I understood it. All right. But the one thing that really stuck out to me many years ago when we were visiting this olive farm was the man said that, there's different kinds of grafts that you can do. But he focused on a side graft. And basically the side graft was you make a cut in the side of the tree trunk or the root stock. And then you would take the branch that you're going to graft into the root stock, and that's called a scion. I'm going to go to the tablet, and I might be mispronouncing that. That's how it's spelled. Scion, however you want to say it. Okay, but here's what it means. It's an heir. That's what that term means, an heir. All right. So you take that from the wild tree in this regard. You cut it out of that wild tree. It's the heir. And then you've got that cut in the side of the rootstock, the cultivated tree in this one. And then you put that and you bind it. You have to bind it to it. And here's what he said. Usually we'll know if that graft is going to take hold by 3 days. And so I stopped him and said, no, wait a minute, say that again. And he says, well, usually when you graft into the side of an olive tree, if it's going to take by the 3rd day, it should take. I said, so in other words, you're saying that it takes on the 3rd day? And he says, yes, generally. So that to me was, very, very, very significant, right? And then he also said this, that oompa, I don't know what the proper terminology is, that's in the wild branch that which is grafted into the original tree, it provokes the tree to explode in fruitfulness. Because the cut in the side, just like if we cut ourselves, if we cut our finger or something, what does our body do? It sends all the goodies to the wound, right? Mm. Well, the tree does that as well. So it's got this wound in its side. Think about the Messiah on the tree now, okay? It's got this wound in its side, and then it's going to send all the goodies to where that wound is to help it heal. Well, what's in that wound now? It's that branch that's been grafted in and bound to it, which then helps it to take hold and become part of, and this is the point, the objective is for that was wild to now become part of, one with that which was cultivated. And that process, he said, causes the tree to just explode into fruitfulness. And if you go back and read Romans 11, that's exactly what happens, is that in that day all Israel shall be saved. So that's my very limited understanding of it, and I want to stress, very limited.
Seems along the way I heard, or I thought you had said something about the difference in the taste or the meatiness, maybe that there wasn't so much flesh.
I can't speak to that. I don't know.
On the original one. So anyway, it'll be interesting to.
Now, I don't think you heard me say that, because I don't remember saying anything like that,
Right.
because I don't know.
I'd be
I don't have any
interested
knowledge
to find
of that.
out what the difference between before, after, and separate versus together. The multiplication I can see, and the explosion and I can see, because it's in the joining. I think you've spoken about this. In order to produce, you can't. When you're separate, you can't produce, but when you come together, there's multiplication. So whether it's Jew and Gentile by themselves, once they come together, there's the fullness.
Right.
And so, anyway.
Yes. Well, in the beginning, he gave us the pattern. There's male and there's female. He took the rib or the side from Adam while he was in the deep slumber, and then from that he made the woman, and then he joined them together so that they become one flesh, because you can't have life unless the two become one. And they can't be two of the same. They can't be the same sex. You can't make it equal to what God, ordained in the beginning. And so prophetically speaking, we've had these two different views and two different perspectives of the one God. Jew. Well, let's use Paul's terminology. Circumcision and those regarded as the uncircumcision. All right, but why did the Messiah come? That those two, he broke down the middle wall of separation so that the two could become one, that he could present them as one body unto the Father. Why? Because when we come together as one, as prophesied, that's when the tree is going to really explode into fruitfulness. And our job is to provoke them to jealousy, Paul says. Now, and I don't believe, and this is getting off topic just a tad, I don't believe we provoke them to jealousy by thumping them over the head with the New Testament.
Right.
No. How do we provoke to jealousy? Bill's opinion. When we're doing the feast and we're doing the Sabbath and we're trying to eat biblically clean, and you come in contact with somebody who's of the circumcision, some of the first things they're going to ask you is, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? And I'm going to say, well, because I believe the Messiah told me to do that. And that's going to get into conversation. It might not go the way we'd like for it to go every time, but it will generate some very interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
But it's also been my experience that when we, as his people, are at least striving to keep his commandments, we're learning, we're growing, we're trying to figure all this out. It takes an argument away from the side of circumcision, who have always perceived us as being, and I would say rightfully so, at large, as being people who follow a Messiah that we think said we don't have to do all those things. I hope everyone understood what I just said. I'm not saying the Messiah said that. I'm saying that many of his followers say that he did. All right? And so that's how we've been perceived all this time. Okay, but now when they come in contact with people like us who are observing Shabbat, we're keeping the feast, we're trying to do those things that are written in the commandments, there's some of them that don't know what to do with that. And so that kind of provokes the very, very interesting conversations. Now, I believe that ultimately he's the one who creates the environment whereby they are ready to hear what we've got to say, and we have learned some things and are better prepared to say what needs to be said, like Joseph and his brothers in that courtroom that day. He's the one that created the environment where these two come together. It was Joseph's task to be separated from the family, to go to prison, to have to go through all the things that he went through, to learn discretion, wisdom, and to be full of the Spirit of God so that he could be in the right place at the right time so that all Israel might be saved. So I got off topic just a little bit. We were talking about olive trees, but it's all connected,
Well,
at least in my mind.
And with that in mind too, there should be a provoking to the Gentiles as well that have not.
Absolutely.
So
Can I speak to that?
Yes, you may.
I think I will. Well, if you go and read what Paul said in Romans 11, I think it's, let me just pull it up here. Verse 13, Romans 11, for I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my office, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are of my flesh, and might save some of them. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall be the receiving of them but life from the dead? So right there he is saying, look, God's not through with them yet. All right? For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches are broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them partake of the root and fatness of the olive tree, don't boast against the branches. But if you boast, you bear not the root, but the root bears you. You will say then, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well said, because of unbelief they were broken off, and you stand by faith. But don't be high-minded, fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, take heed lest he not spare you as well. In other words, we're not all of that, is what he's saying. And he's talking to us, those who are not part of the natural branch, so to speak. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God, on them which fell severity, but toward you goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise you shall also be cut off. Again, you're not all of that. And they also, if they abide not in unbelief, they shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? In other words, we had a lot more to overcome in that regard than they would. All right? That's how I read it anyway. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own eyes, or your own counsel, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles, Miloha Goyim, be come in. All right, so here's, to your point, what I wanted to say. Blindness in part has happened to Israel. The first thing we should acknowledge is the tree. Who does it represent? Israel. Okay? The tree is Israel. All right? Some of the branches got broken off. Why? Because of unbelief. Did all the branches get broken off? No, they did not. Some of them did. And those that were broken off, he says, they can be grafted back in again. All right? You, those of us who were of the wild, you got grafted in. And that's how you stand, by faith. So don't get all proud of yourself. You need to remain faithful. You need to stay in belief, and you'll stay part of that tree. And so doing, you're going to provoke some of these other branches. But then he says this, that blindness in part has happened to Israel. So here's how I see it, and this is to the point you made. In that tree, there are natural branches and wild branches, all part of the same family. Blindness, in part, has happened to Israel. It seems to me that some blindness has affected the natural branches, but also affects the wild branches. But it's partial blindness, because it's blindness in part. So breaking it down, making it simple. There are things that you and I have seen that our Jewish brethren have not, namely the identity of the Messiah. Agreed? All right. For the longest period of time, there were things that our Jewish brethren saw that we didn't see. What was that? The Torah. Right? So they saw the Torah, the need to keep God's commandments, but they didn't see who the commandments were leading them to. We saw the identity of the Messiah, but somehow or another skipped over that thing about, if you love me, keep my commandments.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So we've both been blind in part. But now what is happening in this day and time? Some of those who see who the Messiah and understand who the Messiah is are now beginning to understand that if we love him, we're supposed to keep his commandments. We're supposed to do what Moses wrote, because what Moses wrote points us to him. And as we do that, what will happen, according to this, is going to provoke them to see things that they haven't seen before. And what is that? The identity of the Messiah. So I am convinced that our doing the things that are written in the commandments, it's not just me and you trying to do this and that and be more righteous. It's you and I being obedient to our Messiah, and as we're bearing that fruit, that's going to open the eyes of those who have not yet seen him through what Moses wrote. I'm convinced of that. Now, it's the Spirit of God who brings all this together, but you and I have our part. So, yes, we were blind in part as well. And there are many of our brethren who are in Messiah who remain blind to some of those things. But as more and more see and understand that we do this not in order to be saved, we do these things because we are saved. And as we bear that fruit, it will provoke some of our Jewish brethren to see the Messiah, not because of me or you, but because he's in that fruit. He's in the things that we do. Anyway, who's next? Let me get somebody who hadn't gone yet. Okay, anybody else? Yes, John.
Just a comment on the olive tree thing. Just some observations. I just think of apple trees. You think of a cultivated apple tree versus one that you find growing out in the woods somewhere. Mm-hmm. And what are the differences? The differences are a cultivated apple tree has been pruned and cultivated and given lots of nutrients, hopefully, to try and produce good, tasty, luscious apples with a lot of flesh on the apple. And the wild apple tree is just kind of out there doing its thing, and so most of its energy goes to worthless branches and leaves and not much fruit, and the fruit that is there tends to be a lot more sour and smaller and not much to it. So I'm assuming the same thing is true of olive trees, where the olive tree cultivated has been nurtured, and everything that the caretaker is doing is trying to get that olive tree to produce big, thick olives that will taste good and have a lot of oil. Whereas the wild olive tree is just out there doing its thing, growing branches, and the olives are going to be smaller. There's going to be a lot more pit and a lot less oil-producing flesh to it. So, but on the other hand, the wild plants have a lot of scrappiness because they've had to survive.
I said oomph. I like your
Yes.
word better. Okay.
So they've had to be out there fighting just to stay alive and shoot up. So when you take that wild shoot and graft it in, you have all the scrappiness, but now you have all the benefits that have been in the good cultivated olive tree as far as the nutrients and everything done to encourage it to produce good fruit. And so you think about Yeshua, once we've been grafted in, we get all of his goodness and all the training of the cultivated tree in order to produce good quality fruit that has a lot of oil-producing flesh versus just out doing our own thing.
Could it be this?
Yes.
Those two coming together, all right? Something else you said that was prompted a thought. Go back and say everything you just said. No. Oh, no, I remember what it was now. You use the word pruning, cutting. That's a big part of the process. And from the word, or a word that means to cut, we get this word here. Brit, covenant. And so that's a very integral part of all of this, that is all covenantal. And so cutting and, being pruned, that's all part of the process. So yeah, that's what I was trying to say a while ago, what he just said. No, it was very good. It was very good. All right, real quick, it's 8:30. Yes. You're hiding under that hat over there. Is it a hat day? It's a hat day.
It's a hat day. I was just thinking about the is it possible that we are self-pruned when we choose the life that we do and we follow the Messiah? Because I know what for our family, when we started walking this path, either through divine intervention or just our choices, we started gravitating away from things that would not bring him honor and glory. And we started driving and striving for things that would. Things we stopped eating a certain way, and we started keeping different feasts, and that people started being cut from our lives because we didn't. I kind of used the word orbiting. We weren't orbiting around the same things, so we had less involvement with them. And so people is the one thing that I see as a follower of Messiah that has been pruned out of my life more than probably anything else. And that's not a bad thing, because a lot of those branches are called suckers, and they'll suck the life right out of those wild branches.
So you're asking, or you're just stating that a lot of the pruning we kind of bring on ourselves, right? I think we make ourselves available to be pruned. You know, we put ourselves in the position to be pruned. We make choices, we make decisions. You know, I mean, because to me, the life we've chosen is one of saying no to me. You know, saying no to self. It's all about self-denial. To me, for me, to be set apart is the same as self-denial. It's denying myself what it wants to do and who I want to hang around with, who I would have preferred to hang around with at one point in time anyway, what I would have chosen to eat, you know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, whenever it was. So yeah, I mean, we make those choices. I do think that there are seasons in our life when the pruning goes beyond anything you and I would have considered, you know, because he knows us better than we know ourselves, right? And he knows our strengths and weaknesses. He knows what's deeply entrenched in who and what we are, and he knows where to cut. He knows where to go. So I think, I don't disagree with you. I'm saying that I think that the pruning process can go beyond that, and probably the things that we need the most are the things that we don't usually consider first and foremost. Because some of those people that you're referring to, I made the decision to walk a certain way. They made the decision not to join in on that, you know, and we just kind of drifted apart. But then there have been those times when ultimately he orchestrated circumstances whereby some of those separations came that I wasn't looking for, or I wasn't expecting, or I didn't particularly like until later on when I realized why it had to be, you know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that some of the pruning is not something that I chose to do. It's something that I put myself in a position for him to do when it came time for it to be done. Anyway, I'll do one more. I'm not trying to get off easy tonight, but I have a migraine. I mean, it's really kind of doing a number on me. So, yes. Is there anyone, hold on, is there anyone else that hasn't gone yet that you would like to ask something or say something? I'm going to let Jenna go, okay, since you already had an opportunity. All right?
There's something that your friend Brad had said a while ago when he was here doing Shavuot, and he said something about the computer being like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
The internet.
The internet.
Yeah.
So that kind of took me down a path, just an observation of the things that are going on, and kind of going on what you were saying about the Arev, about the that coronavirus vaccination and how it has 3 components to it. And I think your friend was absolutely correct. And but there's, when the Lord said to, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments, I think that you can look on it superficially. If you can look at the things that are in that vaccination, like bats, and how you shouldn't have anything to do with bats, and you wouldn't put that intentionally in your body.
I'm certainly not going to eat them.
Yeah, but you wouldn't intentionally put it in your body. So if you're
Right.
going to obey his commandments, and you say, okay, I'm just going to do this superficially and do this, but then what it does is it separates your DNA and it unravels. So it's not just a rev, where you're combining two things and mixing. It's making it completely a different organism. So I think we do need to walk in spirit and truth, and we need to really seek out God's commandments and follow them. But more importantly, I think we need to be praying. I could go in forever about the vaccination and how the whole world is agreeing on one thing, which in my lifetime, I'm 46 years old, and I've never seen the whole world agree on one thing ever. And I think that when this thing does come out, I don't know if you'd be able to speak on it at that time, like if
You mean if they have a vaccine for the COVID thing?
Yeah.
All I really have to say is I'm not taking it.
But for people who watch you, I mean, if like people like my husband, he has to have definitive proof, like speak to him intellectually, whereas other people may just.
Well, I mean, let's go back to the good and evil part. And there's something you said that I think is very, very important. And I want to just expound on it just a touch, about the idea of your DNA unraveling, and you're not just kind of being both this and that, you become something else.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing what you said. To me, that makes perfect sense, and particularly when you consider Messiah said, a house divided against itself can't stand. Eventually, it's going to be one or the other. It has to be. There has to come that time and place where it has to become one or the other. Kind of a sidebar, Lincoln picked up on that concept when he made his House Divided speech, I think 1858 with Stephen Douglas. He was talking about slavery, slave states and free states, and he was saying that the nation can't continue to go and be half slave and half free. It has to be one or the other. And he was right. It had to be one or the other, because a house divided can't stand. So you and I have been born again, but we're still walking around in this corruptible flesh, right? So something's got to give, right? What's going to give? If we remain faithful, we are going to be like him when we see him like he is. Mortal will put on immortality. Corruption will put on incorruption, all right? We're not going to stay this way forever. But on the flip side of that, when you go and you read, when the serpent in Genesis 3, I'm bouncing all around, I know, but I'm going to kind of bring it back to what you were saying. In Genesis 3, the Nachash, the serpent, is described as being the most subtle or crafty or clever of all the beasts of the field. The Hebrew term there, the root word, it means bare, slick, And I think slick is talking physically, but it can also be figurative, Somebody who's slick, what are they? They're sly, they're sneaky, they're crafty, they're really good with words, right? So when the man and the woman ate the fruit and they realized that they were naked, that word that's translated naked comes from the same word that describes the serpent as being slick. In other words, they saw themselves not just as naked, but figuratively speaking, they were kind of like the serpent in that they began to be crafty, manipulative, sneaky, because isn't that what mankind does? So we become more and more like that, but that's why we have to be born again of the incorruptible seed, so that we don't become that. Being born again of the incorruptible seed, we are being conformed to who? The image of God's Son. All right. So as far as the vaccine and how what I just said relates to that, I don't know the science of it, frankly. Okay? I know the concept biblically, and that is you don't put things that were never intended to be part of this body into this body, because when you do that, you undermine the health and the stability of this body. And if you are what you eat, we say that all the time, and I haven't turned into a Twinkie yet, but the point is that if I continue to eat things that are bad for me, it's going to begin to tell on me. I'm going to begin to exhibit, unhealthy traits in reflecting those things that I ate. Well, likewise, if I'm putting chemicals into my body all the time that were never really intended to be in my body, it's going to have an ill effect, So I don't know that I'm not well versed in the science of all this. I don't pretend to know all those things. I can only look at it from a biblical point of view, that I'm not going to put something in my body, particularly when it's garnered the support of a world that throws the scripture out the window and dismisses it and scoffs at it and mocks it and says, it's antiquated and of no value. I'm not going to take their opinions on this, and I'm not going to take a lecture from them on why I should do this. So that's just kind of where I'm at on it. So
my point is that
the mic's not on. Did you turn it off? Did it die? Okay. All right.
my point is that there's this lady, her name is Carrie, she's a doctor, her name is Dr. Carrie Midday, and she has gone through many different things, platforms that she had to go to as a doctor. And Bill Gates has his number, his patent is 060606. That is, the patent is actually written into the actual vaccination, and they can transcribe and write their own name into your genetic code.
Okay, let me just kind of summarize what you just said for the people who couldn't hear you. The vaccine's bad. All right?
But there's people who are like Christians, just like us, except they don't follow the commandments.
Well,
It's just medicinal, and it brings they don't see that already.
my people perish for lack of what? Knowledge, okay? We have a responsibility to try to, understand these. Well, yeah, we want to try to share things with people. But ultimately, you can't convince someone of something they're not willing to be convinced of. You live it, you practice it, you make decisions, you make choices, you bear the fruit. And then if you bear the fruit, like the kind that John was describing, that's the tree's been pruned, it's been fertilized, and it's producing lots of fruit, and it's lots of good fruit, then we have to believe that there are going to be people who are hungering after and thirsting after righteousness. And they're going to come and see the fruit that you're producing in your life, and they're going to partake of that. But then we have to realize that there are always going to be people who would turn their back on the tree of life and go to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There are always going to be people who don't want to be convinced of things that are going to challenge them and require them to make differences in their life. That's just the way it is. So all we can do, I think anyway, is we keep our focus on our Messiah. We follow him. We produce the fruit, and we inspire, and we provoke to jealousy. We do all of those things that we can do as he guides us, and he gives us the strength to do. And then when we have opportunity to engage people in a conversation, there are things that an intellectual may require, but there are things that intellectuals will never get, because there are some things that God gives to us that the brain will never receive. It has to be received here. So I'm not going to, and I'm not qualified to, first of all. Now, if Brad were here, he could engage with somebody on that level, and quite well. I'm not that person. I'm going to try to engage with them on the heart matter. And I'm not saying that Brad wouldn't, don't misunderstand me. But I don't know those things. I don't understand those things. I have to get to that part. Here's why, here's the principle in the Bible why I can't do this and why I don't think you should, But everybody's got to make up their own mind on it. Some people are very fearful. Some people are very concerned about all these kinds of things, and they think that that's the silver bullet that's going to fix everything. But what happens when it doesn't? You and I still have to be walking upright, still producing fruit, doing the things that maybe they didn't care for 6 months ago. But there will come a day, and I'll kind of bring it to a close with this. You know, Joseph in his early days was probably, well, he was probably a little juvenile in the sense that God showed him some things and he ran out to tell him, hey, look what God showed me. You're going to bow down to me. You know, it didn't go over so well. You know, it kind of made them mad. They didn't like him. But it didn't take away from the fact that God had shown him these things. It's just that, you know, he had to grow. He had to mature. He had to learn to use wisdom and apply wisdom. He had to learn what it means to be discreet. Sometimes you don't just tell everybody everything God's told you right then. Why? Why are we told don't cast your pearls before swine? They won't listen. They'll trample it underfoot. They have no regard for it. And then what do? They turn on you. That's what he said. So we have to be very, I don't want to use the wrong word here, but we have to be wise in who we share with, what we share, when we share, how we share, all those kinds of things. And Joseph, in my view, he started out, you know, just an excited, very zealous young man that was just eager to share with everybody what God had shared him. You know, I don't know that it was necessarily nanny boo boo kind of a thing, but it was, I had this dream. Let me tell you about my dream. I'm so excited about it. Well, it got him in a pit. He went into exile, and we could, you know, argue correctly that was all part of God's plan. But my point is this: in prison, he learned how to use wisdom. In prison, he learned discretion. In prison, he became full of the Spirit of God. So that later on, when he created an environment where they were ready to listen to him, he was ready to speak. He had their attention. God orchestrated all of that. So do you understand what I'm saying to you? Is that we focus on producing the fruit in our lives. He's going to orchestrate the circumstances where those who don't want to listen to you today will listen. It's just a matter of time. So, anyway. I'm going to call it a night if you guys don't mind. I was going to do it anyway, but all right. Richard, come up here, brother. All right, come on. Let me help you up here then. We're so glad you were back.
Oh, praise God.
All right. Will you lead us in prayer as we dismiss this evening?
Thank you, Heavenly Father. Father, I just want to give you all the glory, Lord, for what you have done, what you are doing in this body, in each of our individual lives. Father, it's your plan, not our plan. And Father, I pray that everyone here will take the words of wisdom that have been given to us, Father, and let them sink in and nurture, not into our head, but into our hearts, Father, so that we can cultivate, Lord, the kind of life that you want us to lead. So, Father, tonight, as we leave, Lord, it is my prayer that everyone will take something from tonight, Father, and bury it into their soul, into their heart, Father, and live out that what you have given us to live out. Thank you, Lord, in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Thank you, brother. Everybody have a good night.